The current case has caused a great public stir. It has once again raised fundamental questions that the judiciary must confront. Who was the protagonist really? A brutal psychopath who skillfully manipulated people, or an innocent person who was framed by a bloodthirsty thug? A bohemian life often becomes a target. People believe it promises them everything, even immortality. But the story of Sophie is so enigmatic that it becomes clear neither money nor power can protect against a terrible fate, if fate wills it so. Sophie Baun was born on July 28, 1957 in Paris, France. From birth, she grew up in an atmosphere of wealth and luxury in a well-known and respected French family involved in the fashion and film industries. At that time, it was a truly bohemian environment where the crème de la crème of society gathered. Sophie was also a talented, artistic, and assertive woman, which is why she developed in this direction and had a successful career as a film producer. Her face became known throughout the country and a symbol of success. Nevertheless, she did not forget her private life and family happiness. In 1991, Sophie married film producer Daniel Toscan and became Sophie Toscan du Plantier. This encounter was no accident. Both moved in the film world. They were a good match. The couple became the epitome of luxury and wealth of that era. This dream wedding attracted the attention of the media. For both celebrities, it was a logical continuation of their successful careers. Sophie moved into a luxurious villa with her son from her first marriage. In the eyes of all who knew this woman well, she was a strong and energetic woman who defended her convictions emphatically and pursued her goals with tireless perseverance. But only those who knew her better knew that Sophie was a gentle and kind, calm, modest, and loving mother whose life revolved around her son, Pierre-Louis. Sophie maintained the glamorous image of an outstanding and fashion-conscious woman. Her days were filled with constant filming, camera flashes, and the uninterrupted attention of journalists from the television and film industries. As the woman aged, she increasingly longed for privacy, peace, and a family life far away from the constant attention of outsiders and fans. That is why in the early 90s, Sophie returned more and more often to her house in the rural area of Dunmanus West in Cork, Ireland. She had often vacationed here with her family as a child. Cork was a popular spot for wealthy artists and writers who were inspired by the picturesque beauty of the area. The glamour and glitz of Paris had exhausted the woman so much that she chose this quiet, cozy house in seclusion as a retreat. She bought the cottage in 1993. Unlike the villas she was accustomed to, there were even difficulties with some amenities here. The house was very remote, making it quite difficult to get to. The most important thing for Sophie was that this area, since her childhood, was the only place that could guarantee her seclusion and peace. After she managed to get here, the difficulties were not over. As there were problems with the electricity supply and heating in this place, not always, but interruptions did occur. However, this was not so important for relaxation. The restoration of her emotional strength and the search for inspiration were primarily drawn by the landscape and the charm of the province, which evoked memories of a carefree childhood. When Sophie came here for the first time after a long break, she was enchanted by the beauty of nature, as if she had fallen in love with it anew. From that moment on, she could forget all the inconveniences. Sophie preferred to retreat here during the summer months, but always returned home. In Paris, the woman described this time as a period of rest for her soul and emotional strength. As a rule, she traveled here alone. This was also the case in December 1996, when 39-year-old Sophie Toscan decided to travel to Ireland to recharge her batteries and read screenplays before the upcoming New Year's holidays. She arrived in the town alone and retreated to her house in a quiet area. The woman was not a recluse at the time. She mostly chatted with neighbors and acquaintances from her distant childhood who lived here. She was seen several times in the town. Sophie knew many locals, chatted informally with everyone, and never tried to elevate herself above others. Because of this, many saw in her not a woman from the Parisian bohemian milieu but the good old Sophie who had grown up among them. She treated everyone kindly and avoided topics related to her work and private life so that rumors would not spread immediately. Before Christmas, a neighbor decided to visit Sophie at her house. On December 23, 1996, around 10 a.m., she set off to chat, discuss plans for the upcoming holidays, and have a cup of tea after lunch if Sophie had time. But instead of a pleasant conversation, she found her acquaintance lying in the dirt outside the house without signs of life. The woman immediately alerted the police and reported that a mutilated body was lying next to Sophie's house. The body was so disfigured that the neighbor was not even sure if it was Sophie Toscan. When the Irish law enforcement authorities arrived at the crime scene, a terrible sight awaited them. The woman's head was crushed beyond recognition, but the victim's identity could be confirmed. She was identified as Sophie Toscan. At the time of the murder, the 39-year-old woman was still wearing her nightgown and boots on her feet. The bedding in the bedroom was ruffled. It looked as if something had woken the woman up in the middle of the night or early morning. That is why she had to go outside and hastily put on her street shoes. Next to the body, the suspected murder weapon was found, a large concrete block covered in blood. Blood traces led to the front door where the keys were still stuck in the lock. 2 wine glasses were found inside the woman's house, standing in a dish rack. Investigators assumed that the attack had taken place outside the house as there were no signs of a struggle inside. Local police officers here very rarely dealt with such horrific crimes. The local police station was very small. There simply were no experienced experts. Therefore, they waited for the arrival of forensic technicians from a larger city. They were supposed to carefully examine the crime scene and the woman's body. The appropriately qualified experts only arrived a day later in this remote area. All the while, Sophie's body lay outdoors. It was raining and cold. She was merely covered with plastic bags, but due to the damp climate, some important evidence was lost. Finally, a comprehensive investigation began. The first thing that stood out were clear signs of a struggle on Sophie's hands. However, due to the elapsed time, it was difficult to determine their nature. Most of the blood had been washed away by the rain. The preserved traces also did not allow for a precise determination of the time of death. The evidence was very scarce. The criminal investigators reconstructed the sequence of events piece by piece. It was obvious that Sophie had died from a blow to the head with a blunt object. Barely visible blood traces were found on the gate and the front door. Unfortunately, most of these were destroyed by the rain. Since Sophie was wearing boots and the blood was mainly found on the street side, it was assumed that the attack had started here. No signs of a struggle could be found inside the house. And 2 wine glasses standing in the dish rack were not accepted as conclusive evidence, as they were already clean and it was unclear when they had been placed there. Possibly the woman had used them alone at different times. Several DNA samples were secured at the crime scene. Unfortunately, the options for testing and matching profiles were very limited in 1996. This important clue did not lead to valuable progress but was kept in the files. Investigators attempted to reconstruct the chronology of events since Sophie Toscan's arrival in Ireland. They found out that she had arrived on December 21. The woman was seen shopping in a grocery store that same day. She seemed to be walking carelessly and looking at the area. The woman spoke with several locals, was friendly, and enjoyed chatting with everyone she knew well. One of the shop owners she had visited that day recalled that Sophie had been followed by a man in a black coat and hat. According to witness statements, the stranger observed the woman and left the store as soon as Sophie had left. It seemed as if he was following her. That was very noticeable. The suspicious man didn't even buy anything. He wasn't interested in the goods at all. Nobody else noticed this man, at least not on December 21. On December 22, the woman set off for a walk on the path to the castle, which was not far away on a rocky outcrop. She walked along the path from which the ruins could be seen, reached the viewpoint, and spent some time there enjoying the beautiful view. On her way back, Sophie went into town and stopped by a local pub where she ordered tea and chatted with some guests who were her neighbors and frequent visitors to the establishment. Finally, the woman returned to her house and did not leave it again. It was only around midnight that she contacted her husband Daniel, who was in Paris. All this information made it possible to narrow down the time frame. The body was found at 10 a.m. the next morning. This means the attack must have occurred between midnight and that time. Given the brutality of the act, it was assumed that the killer should be sought in the woman's closest circle. This is a typical development. In the vast majority of cases, it is a person who knows the victim well. The first suspect was immediately the victim's husband, Daniel Toscan. There were rumors that there had been disagreements in their relationship. As the police delved deeper into the family's secrets, it turned out that the tensions arose because the man had cheated on his wife. This was persistent infidelity. Sophie knew about it and wanted to end the relationship. She had already announced this before the trip to Ireland, as it turned out. Her attempt to escape the hustle and bustle and prepare for the holidays was also a means of relieving tension and relaxing before separating from her husband. Given that they were prominent and very wealthy individuals, the divorce was bound to be complicated and public. Money and power have always been a weighty motive for murder, but Daniel was quickly struck from the list of suspects. The man insisted that he had been in France at the time of Sophie's murder. This was confirmed by dozens of witnesses without any problem, providing him with a watertight alibi. When journalists learned of the tragic death of the famous personality, numerous speculations began, dampening the festive mood of all the inhabitants of this locality. The tranquil small town became a gathering place for sensationalist reporters. This naturally hindered the investigation considerably, unsettled the local population, and could have led investigators astray. There were even more problems because the bloody event had occurred in a small town with too few police personnel, meaning the resources required for the investigation were simply not available. Checking all theories and false statements took a lot of time. Already at this point, the entire local population was checked. Investigators assumed that the killer not only knew Sophie well but also the area. That is why he had managed to go unnoticed. This also explained why no one had raised the alarm, not even the neighbors' dogs. The animals knew the perpetrator's scent all too well, but he managed to move unnoticed. From this moment on, attention focused on a man named Ian Kenneth Bailey. He was born in Manchester in 1957, was a rather versatile person but had a difficult past and a dubious reputation. In his early years, Ian became an independent journalist, ran his own business, and worked in many different places. In 1991, he moved to Ireland. At the time of the murder, Ian lived in a house with his partner and was known for his problems with the local police. Together with a partner, he founded a company in 1991, but then the problems began. Ian Bailey was involved in several disturbing incidents after attacking his business partner. Disagreements with the authorities led to him being convicted of assault and even incarcerated the same year, though only for a short time. Ian was known to local police for his short temper and aggressiveness from previous cases of domestic violence against his partner, which had even led to her hospitalization. However, he was not imprisoned for this. Ian underwent a psychiatric evaluation. Experts found that he suffered from narcissistic personality disorder. He was impulsive and violent. There was suspicion of a whole range of mental disorders. Ian was described as a person with extremely inflated self-esteem and alcohol dependence. All of this became the trigger for spontaneous and uncontrolled outbursts of rage. He himself attributed his behavior to a difficult divorce that had taken place shortly before his move to Cork. Ian also seemed a suitable suspect for other reasons. His house was only a few minutes from the victim's house, which was visible from there, and he could easily sneak up on her unnoticed. At that time, he lived with his girlfriend Jules Thomas. She also lived in this small town. Interestingly, the couple arrived at the crime scene on December 24, almost immediately after the discovery of Sophie's body as one of the first. They knew many details of the crime that they couldn't possibly know. The couple tried to gather additional information from the police, supposedly to write a report. Ian posed as an independent journalist looking for a sensation, but he was not allowed into the crime scene. The police officers emphasized that the couple was very persistent. They even trespassed into the house. When the man was checked and his criminal past became known, it seemed that he was not a reporter, but a criminal who wanted to find out how far the investigation had progressed. Despite the resistance of the authorities, they managed to write several unpleasant reports. This unhealthy persistence in the investigation only reinforced the police's suspicion against him. The articles were full of inappropriate details and speculation about the deceased's private life. Her relatives were shocked by the unscrupulousness and cynicism that permeated every line of the journalist's articles. After these publications appeared, there was a wave of outrage. Sophie Toscan's relatives even officially refuted the independent journalist's claims in a television program. They were convinced that the man deliberately wanted to defame the name of the murdered woman to become famous and earn money from it. They shared the opinion of law enforcement regarding his possible involvement and viewed him with suspicion. When the police questioned him, he denied having known the deceased at all. However, this version was not shared by everyone. People from Sophie's immediate circle who lived here and had known her since childhood were convinced that they knew each other and considered him involved in the crime. The media also contributed to this by willingly taking up the idea of the journalist's involvement in the murder. He himself denied any guilt and referred to his notes and an informant who, according to him, had provided him with valuable information about the crime. However, he refused to reveal his name. The main character in the man's articles was not only Sophie Toscan, but also a criminal from her inner circle who had allegedly hired the killer. He was convinced that it was one of the woman's former lovers or even her husband, with whom a divorce was imminent. While dealing with the refutations of these lies, a truly valuable anonymous statement emerged. A resident reported seeing an unknown man near the deceased's house around 3 a.m. on December 23. The description matched the man the local shop owner had seen in his store, the man who had been following Sophie. Interestingly, this anonymous witness gave a more detailed description that exactly matched Ian's appearance. A few days later, the independent scandal reporter was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. There he behaved very nervously, made a scene, and threatened to deal with the arbitrariness. Investigators immediately noticed suspicious scratches on the man's face and hands. He explained that a Christmas tree had fallen on him while he was cutting it in the forest. The police officers doubted this version and took photos of the scratches, which made him even angrier. The man's behavior seemed overly aggressive, but he attributed it to his psychological problems. The suspect continued to deny knowing Sophie Toscan and insisted on his version. He believed that one of her ex-boyfriends might have hired a killer to kill her. The suspect loudly claimed that Daniel Toscan, not he, should be interrogated. However, the authorities were convinced that the perpetrator was a local resident who knew the town well. This explained how he could get to Sophie's house without leaving any traces. Ian rightly pointed out that the criminal investigators had taken too long to get to the crime scene, so the traces had simply been washed away by the rain, and affiliation with the town had nothing to do with it. He described the initial investigation of the crime scene as negligence and accused the police of wanting to make him a scapegoat. Investigators spoke with Ian's acquaintances who reported seeing him in a local pub the evening before the crime. His face had no scratches. It seemed unlikely that the man had gone into the forest at night to cut down a Christmas tree after visiting the pub. Despite his protests, the main suspect was arrested on February 10, 1997. This was achieved thanks to new information. The area around Sophie's house and the house itself were examined more closely, but nothing was found. Instead, another important witness emerged, Jules Thomas. The woman was brought in for questioning after the New Year's holidays. She was very afraid of the accusations the police might make against her, and this fear made her talk. She confessed that she had actually met Sophie in the store on December 21. Ian had learned of the celebrity's arrival and gone looking for her to get a sensational story. Furthermore, Julie believed that he might have followed Sophie to the viewpoint she had gone to on the 22nd to admire the castle. He had also been there. When Ian returned that day, he behaved secretively and strangely and even made a disturbing remark that something frightening might happen in the town that night. Ian never said what he meant by that. On the evening of the same day, the two went for a walk, but when they returned, Ian went out again and, as he later admitted, only returned an hour later. He thought Julie was already asleep, but in fact she woke up several times during the night and did not find her lover at home. The journalist later admitted that he had gone to his studio, which was nearby at that time, and had worked there until 9 a.m. The contradictions in his statements, as well as Julie's statements, led to the man's arrest. However, within 12 hours, no concrete evidence was found linking the main suspect to the murder. Under Irish law, a suspect must be released if no irrefutable evidence of their guilt is presented within 12 hours of their arrest. Ian was interrogated. A confession was the only way to put him behind bars in this situation, but he remained unyielding. Law enforcement was forced to release him. However, suspicion against the man intensified. Bailey's behavior became increasingly erratic. He attributed this to psychological problems. Against the backdrop of his involvement in this story as an alleged murderer, the man's health deteriorated. He even began describing hallucinations and at the same time tried to accuse the police of defamation, but all this was in vain. The suspect continued to spread rumors that now sounded like delusions. It was only on January 27, 1998 that it was decided to arrest him again. Ian again pleaded his innocence and claimed the police could not have anything against him. Investigators referred to the only evidence: DNA traces found at the crime scene that did not match the victim. However, these were of poor quality. As the body had lain outdoors for a long time, they were heavily contaminated. It failed again to link him unequivocally to the murder. This became a major problem. Under Irish law, a person can only be arrested twice without charge for a crime. Ian continued to insist on his innocence. The authorities had only hours left during his second detention to prove his involvement in the murder. The man was put under pressure, hoping to force a confession, but he only became angrier and tried to use his connections in journalistic circles to portray the police of the Irish small town in a bad light. The independent journalist again accused the authorities of wanting to make him a scapegoat. Investigators remained convinced that he knew the law and was stalling for time. Although many believed in Ian's guilt, he attributed his unhealthy interest to his journalistic activities, saying he was only trying to get a sensational story. This explained why he had observed Sophie while she was still alive wherever she went. The police again could not find anything against Ian. The main suspect was released, and the investigation finally came to a standstill. In 2003, the man sued several news agencies for defamation. His possible involvement in the murder was never refuted. The man provoked a lawsuit against the media to clear his name. In this trial, several people testified against him, admitting to having seen him on the day of Sophie's death and also before. Most questions were directed at an anonymous witness who had seen Ian Bailey near Sophie's house at night. He accused him of making a false statement. Jules Thomas testified for the prosecution, describing him as a coarse and unstable person. In her opinion, the former lover was indeed capable of something cruel and bloody. Despite all this, the Irish authorities insisted that there were no charges against him. No irrefutable evidence was found, and the collected DNA samples could not be fully analyzed to this day. Ian was bound by the law. Sophie Toscan's family was shocked by the lack of results. The relatives and even the victim's husband considered the police's behavior incompetent. In 2008, the deceased's family turned to a French court asking for an investigation into the woman's death to be initiated within its jurisdiction. But here, too, there were problems. The main witness in this case admitted to falsely accusing the journalist Ian Bailey out of fear of the police. When the main suspect learned of this, he went one step further. In November 2014, he decided to sue the Irish state for wrongful prosecution. His lawyer built his tactic on the confession of the main witness. Despite all this, a French court began proceedings without the presence of Ian Bailey. Under French law, a court can convene in France if a French citizen is killed abroad. About 30 witnesses were called. After the trial concluded, the man was found guilty of murder in absentia of the accused and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The Supreme Court of Ireland refused his extradition, again citing the unlawful decision of the court due to insufficient evidence against the man. The convict, sentenced under French law, remained in Ireland and evaded any extradition threat. A new breakthrough in this case occurred in 2022, when the Irish and French judiciaries decided to join forces and find out who might have killed Sophie Toscan. They retrieved all the files and began to analyze all the evidence again. Some of it was lost, others damaged. Speculations arose that an accomplice of Daniel Toscan might have been involved in the crime. Ian's story might have been close to the truth, however, he did not live to see how the story ended. In January 2024, Ian Bailey died of cardiac arrest. The police came to his apartment to obtain material for a DNA match with the evidence from the 1990s investigation. With today's technologies, DNA profiling and the analysis of biological materials offered a real chance to find out what had happened. Nearly 30 years had passed since the woman's death. Finally, there was hope that they could find out who killed Sophie, but there are still no answers. Thank you for watching. Please like and comment. Take care of yourselves.